I think the communication styles you have in a marriage very often mirror the communication styles between a leader and team.
Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
So here's my story. I was speaking with a friend the other day, and she was telling me about something that was really worrying her with her business. The only unusual thing was this wasn't a client, it was just a friend. And we were talking about the fact that she had been doing really well, but some of her success from last year, and frankly, the last 3 or 4 years, was built on one customer that was responsible for maybe 20-25% of her revenues. It was a windfall when it came in, and she had been doing well, a long-established company, but it was a windfall when it came in. But it really has been a godsend, particularly through COVID. And that customer told her last week that they had just acquired a small company that doesn't do exactly what she does, but overlaps.
Oh, no. Okay.
What she does. So you can understand this was really on her mind.
Business version of I've met someone else.
Yes. Yeah. So she said, look, my customer loves me, loves my staff and all that stuff. But, they were spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so they acquired this company that overlaps. And so they wanted to have a discussion with her about, they wanted to continue working with her in some capacity, but they wanted to have a discussion. And she was just fixated on how much money she was going to lose and where she was going to make up the revenue, all the stuff that business owners know all too well. One of the interesting things in the discussion was, I said, have you talked to your leadership team about it? And she said, no, I haven't spoken to them at all. I said, well, why not? She said, because it's a big blow. And it took me, it like took my breath away when I got the call and they said that. And I wanted to take some time and figure out the rest of the sentence. Say, okay, they told us this, but here are some opportunities, or here's what we can do, or it's not as bad because we can do this, or whatever strategies there are. Because if I told them right now, all I would be saying is the woe is me, we're really in trouble. I don't know how we're going to do this. And it's going to be a major problem. And I don't know what to do. And that's not the kind of leader I want to be. That's not how I want to present to my leadership team. And I said, okay. And the conversation went on. And then I had asked her, well, have you talked to your husband about this? Because it's keeping her up nights. So I was and she said, yes, I did. I know her husband. Her husband's kind of a worrier. And I said, oh, well, okay, well, why did you talk to your husband? I mean, I understand the communication, but...
So that he could also be up at night and keep me company.
Right. And she said, I thought a lot about it. I really did, because to your point, there's nothing he can do. There's nothing he can say. There's nothing he can, whatever. And all it would do is worry him. But I really thought that holding something back, I just didn't feel right about holding something back from him for reasons which I well understand. But what struck me as interesting were the needs of those two constituencies, the husband on one hand and the leadership team on the other, and the different communication strategies that she decided to address.
Oh, I love this.
And why? I wasn't judging her for her choices, but I'm interested in her choices.
Yeah.
What criteria would go into making those decisions, because I understand both of them.
Totally. And it's a very personal and individual choice about like your particular situation, because it's funny, as you were talking, I was thinking through every little step of that story. I could think of clients of mine who have either made the same choice or make the opposite choice. And a lot of those stories are why they hire me. Like I'm the person they talk things through with. And so I just kind of want to lay out a couple of the layers of like other ways, so then we can kind of compare sort of all the thinking. Because on the one hand, I talk to tons of people, these are less my clients, who don't rely on their leadership team ever they feel like they have to figure out everything and then go tell their leadership team about it. And I think that is one of the greatest missed opportunities and errors ever, because you're missing out on all that other thinking and the things that wrap into why someone thinks they have to work that way. And even though it's very often very stressful and harder, is wild. So we can unpack that in a second.
Or you might have the wrong leadership team if that's the right
also
decision.
yeah also also true. Like if your leadership team are not people that you can rely on to help you think things through, it is very interesting. It's the way you're holding that story is, oh, the company has a problem, that means it's my problem, I have to solve it and then let everyone else know how I solved it, versus imagining yourself like, I don't know, I just got this vision in my head of like, like pirate ships and whatnot. Like you can't sail a ship by yourself, like a giant ship. You literally can't. You have to rely on other people to do the things to make the ship move. And I know nothing.
And I don't think that she was necessarily with the I alone can solve it mindset. I think that she was with the, well, I at least have to show them that solutions are possible and then we can puzzle it out.
Right. So that's the like worrying about the being conscious of the mental and emotional state that you infect your company with is absolutely important. So I have one client who originally hired me because she actually does rely heavily on her leadership team. And she noticed that she was going to them with every little thing, often in a state, I'm making like a face here, like, someone was like, oh my gosh, this is a problem, whatever. So she was yanking them around. Like, this is big, this is little, this is they're worried. And it was creating this, I wouldn't say frenetic, that's over dramatizing, but she was just conscious of the fact that maybe every conversation that she needs to have for her doesn't need to be had with them and then have them infected with her current state of mind or whatever that is. So that was actually the role I played, was this sort of like offsides, a place where other conversations could go. And that was really helpful because she still relied on them for problem solving and wrapping them in, but she didn't necessarily bring every little like, yank the chain around piece to the conversation.
But that does show the value of a business confidant, somebody that's outside.
Right.
Wouldn't replace your management team or your leadership team, but there's a value to that component as well.
To kind of blow the steam off and especially for the, in the story you used, it's reacting to a situation, which is one thing. I definitely see that being valuable in when you're just having, we did an episode on business depression, or, if you're in a rut, or if you're just tired, or if you're just feeling demoralized by a bunch of not wins that have happened recently. And you almost are like, is this even worth it? Like that, there's some weight if you bring that to the leadership team. They're like, okay, guys, is this even really, why are we even doing this? That doesn't exactly inspire and motivate people to move forward. But I also don't want to skip over the thing that I don't think gets talked about very often is this like when and how you share what's going on in your business with your spouse.
Yeah.
And I have seen such different approaches to that. Like for some people, it is their closest confidant that helps them think things through and walks them through stuff. Other people share things, but as my one client said, there's no second question. It's just, how was your day? Oh, it's fine. Or it was bad. Or like, oh, okay.
Well, part of that might depend on whether your spouse is also involved in not your business, but a business.
Yep, exactly.
Nikki, as you know, is a speech language pathologist, very intelligent person, but she's not in business. It's a totally different mindset. So I think that if Nikki were running her own company, or it doesn't have to be law, but were something business oriented where there are customers or clients or employees, and she was responsible for some of that, there is a possibility that the discussions would be different.
Right. Sure. Absolutely. But I also encounter a lot of people who have this mindset so those are reasons where you don't have the conversation because it doesn't meet your need. Like, you want more of a back and forth or something that wouldn't be there. But I know a lot of people who don't share things with their spouse because they don't want to burden them, or they don't want to upset them, or they don't want them to worry, or they're managed. I have one client whose wife she's incredibly smart. She runs a whole division for a thing. I mean, she's actually a great person to strategize with, and he relies on her for a lot of problem solving kinds of conversations, and they, share neurons on that level. But if he is ever having like moments of uncertainty, or I want to burn it all down, or maybe I should just have an ice cream shop instead, those days, she has a very, very high need for like certainty and stability. And so
Really?
anything that sounds like that just like gets her all sorts of anxious, and she's on edge, and she wants to like solve the problem. And so then he's on edge. And so he can't have those conversations with her.
Just as an aside, I will tell you that I don't generally have the conversations with Nikki about, oh, this is going wrong, or what do I do, or strategizing, whatever. But if I went to her and said, I want to burn it all down and open an ice cream shop, her first reaction would be, what flavor should we have? She'd be like, okay.
See, yeah, exactly. So there are these dynamics. I am endlessly fascinated because this is no secret. Like, I really do believe like every conversation needs a place to go. If you're someone who shares conversations, for instance, my husband is not. His conversations do not need a place to go because they're fine in his own head. So not everyone needs to verbally process things to get to an answer. But for those of us who do, finding a way and a place to have those and those like this myriad of choices, because as you told the story, the exact same reasons that she didn't want to share with the team were replicated in her husband. Like, her husband was just going to worry, and actually the leadership team had a potential to be able to do something about it, whereas he doesn't. And so it's just interesting how you kind of pick and choose where you take your story.
In talking with her, she almost felt that if she has something that's really big that's worrying her, and she didn't talk to her husband about it, despite the fact that he would be worried, etc., that it was almost like cheating on him in a way, that there was, she felt that she was not, I don't know if you call it honoring the relationship, or she felt that she was not being forthcoming, or not living up to the kind of communication you should have spouse to spouse, which I totally respect.
Yeah. I totally get that, because so just very quickly, I don't interrupt your story there, but Paul, my husband, especially when we were younger, he would be just not himself for like a whole week or like 2 weeks. I mean, this is not like a day. This is like a chunk of time. And he'd be like, "How you doing? I'm fine," blah, 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 but just sort of whatever, not really thoroughly there in the room or whatever. And then like he'd walk in this one day and he'd be like, "Oh, I'm so glad that was over. I've been worrying about this for, so after the fact." And then I'm like, you've been like, and then I find out that for 2 weeks, he's been in like turmoil, internal anguish about some project or, something that was going on that was bothering him and that he was worrying all about. And that's just how he is. But at the time when I first encountered those, I was like, what, you've been this upset and you didn't even tell me? Not like I felt like he had to. I felt bad for him that he was like in it alone, but now I know he's just fine being in it alone.
But no, and we have that dynamic too. If I'm not feeling well, unless it's a hospital thing, I generally won't tell Nikki.
Right.
And then she'll find out. And occasionally my sister, who works in my firm, would call and go, "So how's Elliot feeling?" I know he was, because she saw during the day. And so Nikki would get picked off. But it's often like, in terms of health, it's often like if you've gone to your doctor and you have, at the extreme, you have a cancer scare or something like that, and you're waiting for the test to come in, that I know people who would not tell their spouse because there's nothing they can do. They don't want to worry that person. They'll get the results and they'll tell their spouse. They'll deal with it one way or another. Kind of like Paul going, "Oh, that's a relief."
Well, and Paul's family's that way. Like, they don't tell anybody when anybody has anything going on. Like, literally one time his mother-in-law said to me, "Well, last week when Ernie was in the hospital," and I was like, "What?" Like, whereas my family makes like a phone tree chain call every day. Like, "So I had my blood pressure checked this morning and I just wanted to let you know here's where it is."
So that's what you have. You have those different communication styles, but I think the communication styles you have in a marriage very often mirror the communication styles between a leader and team, even though the team's function is a lot different.
But in your story, they were opposite. She took totally different. She took opposite choices for.
Yes, she took opposite choices. She had the same calculation, meaning that all the team could do was worry, all the spouse could do was worry. I have to be able to, but to the team, she was more caring about their well-being and their response. She's like, I have to show them everything's okay because that's my role as a leader. Whereas to my husband is like, you know what? I wish I could say this, but I really need open communication. I'm going to tell him I'm scared.
Yeah. So I am so fascinated by like 8 things you just said. So there's open communication. There's what you have an obligation to tell, because I mean, and granted, you're third-handing her story here, so I don't want to make up things for her, but there's a difference between open communication and I am obligated to share everything, like you have a right to every story that I have. That's like an interesting dynamic, I think. And then there's also with the leadership team, though, they actually could do something. They, in theory, I mean, I don't know the situation, but they do have the capacity to do something about it. I don't know that it's true that all they could do is worry.
No, that's fair.
I do think that there's a dynamic there that is different than the marital one, but in both, I think the vulnerability aspect should always be questioned, because this perception, and it's a big part of why we started this podcast, this perception that as a leader, you're supposed to always have it together and always have the answers. I think that's pretty toxic, and it's problematic. So being able to say, here's a problem and I don't have answers right now, but let's figure this out together. Or, here was a thing and I didn't handle it well. Can we figure this out together? That vulnerability, I think, is actually really important. But with the team, not only did they have a something that they could do to help, but there is another factor there that doesn't exist necessarily with the husband, is that if you do share a thing and it does put the team in a state where they're worried or anxious or whatever, you do have to think about how that affects the company. If they're now worried that the wheels are coming off the cart and one of your key people decides to go find another job, there can be these ramifications to unnecessary angst. But maybe that just comes in that relationship of, is this leadership team a group that in the face of a problem jumps in to help solve it? Or if they're like, oh, looks like a storm's a brewing, I'm going to get in a lifeboat.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I remember in the conversation, I was really thinking of talking to her more about what you said, which is, you're right that it's not necessarily true with the leadership team that all they can do is worry. But what is accurate is her perception was all they can do is worry. Mm-hmm. And had I had my lawyer or coach, for lack of a better word, or whatever, hat on as opposed to my friend on, I would say, well, wait a minute. Why, if you're convinced, if this situation was 25% of your business, so it's a major piece, and you have a leadership team and you're convinced that all they can do is worry, isn't that in and of itself an issue to be addressed inside the company? Addressed,
or at least like taken a really strong look at, like, to your point earlier, is that because that is the top level of their capacity, or is that because you aren't giving them the opportunity to show you that they have that capacity?
Right. And maybe, there are different criteria, and maybe she just hadn't explored what, in fact, given them an opportunity to step up in a way that
I see that.
Crisis.
Yeah, I see that all the time. In fact, there's a company I'm working with right now where there are all these hard questions, and they've just never really wrapped in they don't have a formal leadership team per se, but that level of senior people, they had worry. And there's so many things that get wrapped in there. I alluded to earlier. It's not just, do you think they can be helpful or not? There are lots of issues of privacy is not the right word. I can't think of the right word, but like the risks of transparency, like, well, I don't want them, not wanting to talk about financials, not wanting to, imagining that there's all this information that has to be kept super, super, super in the lockbox den of privacy. And I do think looking at that as a leader in a company and really questioning what parts should be kept private, because what I end up saying a lot of times, or just at least asking the questions about, is people can only help with things that they have a line of sight to what the things are. You can't blindfold somebody and then have them help you with a jigsaw puzzle.
I can say, and on this point, I can say it's in the last couple of years. As you know, my firm is small. We don't have a leadership team, because that team would be the entire population of the firm. But I do have people who've been with me for a long time. And my gut reaction had been, well, I'll handle this. That's my role. I'm going to handle this and whatever. And for the past several years, I've made a conscious effort, because it's not my instinct. I made a conscious effort to start bringing people into conversations or talking to them when I'm unsure, when I don't have the answer, or I'm really looking for a solution. The most recent, and I might have mentioned this before, the most recent was we were presented with a huge opportunity, which could have been a huge opportunity, but there were pros and cons. It would have been a pretty significant monetary commitment for us. And I had a conference call coming up, and I decided, because I can make the decision on my own. I'm allowed to do that, But I decided
I can do that. You're not the boss of me.
I can do that. But I decided to bring in Lacey because she would be doing a good bit of the work involved, but she was never involved in managing the firm, and she probably couldn't tell you what the revenues of the firm were if she were asked. And at the end of the conference call with the other side, and then we were talking about, I was asking her opinion. After that conversation with Lacey, all I was saying, and I told this to her, boy, I'm glad I brought in Lacey.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she thought of things, not surprisingly, that were not within my mindset. Her contributions were really good, and sometimes we disagreed, sometimes we agreed, but it was great. And I thought, yeah, let's do that some more.
Yeah. And it's funny. I didn't realize how unusual this perspective was, because it was the only perspective I had. But I was with that architecture firm for 17 years, starting when I was 23. And from my third month there, I was sitting in on the weekly leadership team meetings, and just the way that they handled things there, and the way that one of the principals in particular viewed this whole concept of who you wrap into conversations. He would wrap anyone. He would wrap multi-layers of people into things just to get their opinion. And it was so brilliant, because he wasn't getting your opinion because he wasn't sure what to do. Mm-hmm. And he didn't get your opinion because then whatever you said then became the thing.
Right.
Which I know are two of the hesitations people have. They're like, well, if you ask, then you have to do what they say. And I'm like, nope, actually you don't. We never had that expectation, but it was a great example. But he realized, I mean, for all the conversations I have where people are wondering for this magic spell of how do you get people really committed to the company, like thinking like an owner, super engaged, and that firm still has stacks of people who have been there 12, 15, 20, 25 years, which is just unheard of these days. And part of it is because they wrapped us in really early. And so I remember I'd only been there a few years, and there was a potential conversation about an acquisition or a merger or something with another firm. And normally those are kept in the quiets of the quiets until the very last minute and whatever. Not at our firm. That one guy took us all out to a happy hour, and he was like, I'm just curious, this came up. What do you think? You can't share this around. It's really important you not share this around, but what would you think about that? And we had a really intelligent, important conversation about it. And what's so interesting is not only then did we not feel blindsided, not only was he building the skill set of us thinking like owners and thinking about all the pros and cons and learning how to not just have the obvious answer, but like, oh, wait, okay, what are the unintended consequences of that? Like, how would that impact that? But then we also just felt this sense of like, our opinion matters. It's worthwhile. And so we were really engaged. And so that's the environment that I grew up in. And so I just inherently see the value of that. But it's been interesting, like how there are many, many other ways to look at it.
I did not grow up in that business environment because law is anything but transparent.
Right.
The industry just really isn't. You have partners, you have equity and non-equity partners. It's a very hierarchical, associates. It's a very hierarchical structure. And I did not come of age in business in a transparent environment. And I think that's my point. I think that for some people, like the one of the principals of the architecture firm that you were talking about, that may have been his natural inclination. Let's talk to anybody. Let's just bring them in. Because some people have that natural impulse to really be inclusive. And for me, in terms of business, it was not a natural impulse. It was a trained impulse to be anything but inclusive. But it can be a learned behavior. And my point is, that gave rise to the story. My point is that I found much greater satisfaction, success, and kind of morale and camaraderie when in adopting the learned behavior of being inclusive, as opposed to the kind of patriarchal approach of I'll handle it.
Absolutely. And just as we're kind of wrapping up here, interestingly with him, that is not his, he is not someone who wraps in other people to his conversations from a personal level. I can tell you, his was a very calculated decision. There was intent and purpose to him wrapping us in, and it was not for him, not at all. He had such a clear, it was nutrients for our growth and commitment and sense of engagement. And he understood what creates that in people. And that was part of it. And then as a side benefit, we often had perspectives that he didn't have. Like, I think I've told this story before. One time they had us at the retreat. This was a thing they always did at the retreat. There'd be something we did where they said, here's the bonus pool. Yep. Here's what we have for bonuses. How would you guys divvy it up? And no, they didn't do it the way we said, but they were shocked by some of our answers. And that did shift a few. They're like, oh, we didn't realize that person was super valuable. Or we've heard that this person is being kind of a pain all the time or whatever. Even though they're good at their job, they're causing all these other issues. So there's just so many multi-layers of value in taking the time to say, how can we have other people learn how to be having these conversations and decisions. But I hope your friend finds a solution. Now I'm worrying for her.
No, I think that she started talking to me because, just much like her management team, I think that she had seen some possible solutions and then she was ready to talk.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
You
can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.